Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to close your eyes for a second and just transport yourself back in time with me. We are going to Berlin.
All right, I'm there.
The year is late 1922. You're standing on a busy street corner, maybe tightening your coat against the wind, and you decide to duck into a bakery. You're hungry, you just want a standard, everyday loaf of bread.
Just a crusty German loaf, the kind you'd have with soup or something. Nothing's bad.
Exactly, nothing fancy at all. So you walk in, you check the price tag, and it says 160 marks.
Okay.
Now, you pause because you remember that not too long ago, before the war, a mark was real money. It was solid. But 160 marks. It's steep, it hurts a little, but you reach into your pocket, pull out the cash, and you walk out with your lunch.
It's manageable. It's high inflation for sure. You'd be complaining about it. But the economy is still functioning.
It works. But here is where the story just goes completely off the rails. I want you to hold that image of the bakery. Now, fast forward just one single year.
Okay, 1 year later.
It is now late 1923. You walk into that exact same bakery for that exact same loaf of bread, but this time, that 160 marks from last year.
Uh-oh.
It won't even buy you a single crumb. It won't even buy you the smell of the bread coming out of the oven.
Because the price has changed just a little bit.
Just a tad. To get that loaf of bread now, you don't need 160 marks. You need 200 billion marks.
It's a number that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. It truly is.
Yeah.
It sounds like a typo in a history book, not a real price.
It sounds like we're talking about distances between galaxies, not the price of flour and water. But we aren't. And, we aren't talking about some ancient civilization or a tiny island nation that nobody has heard of.
No, this is Germany, a major industrial titan, a place known for precision, for engineering, for rational thought.
And this country went from having a stable, gold-backed currency to printing banknotes worth 100 trillion marks in the span of just a few years.
It is arguably the most famous financial disaster in human history. I mean, the textbook example, it's the moment money literally died. And I think what makes it so compelling, so chilling, is that it happened to a sophisticated, modern society.
And the visual images from this time are just, they stick with you. We've all seen those photos in history class, right? The ones with children building pyramids out of stacks of cash.
Because the bricks of money were literally cheaper than wooden toy blocks.
Or the stories, which sound like jokes, of people taking a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy groceries, leaving it outside for a moment.
And coming back to find someone had stolen the wheelbarrow but dumped the cash on the ground. The container was more valuable than the contents.
That's the one. But the image from our sources that really just blew my mind was the wallpaper. That people were actually using official government banknotes to wallpaper their living rooms.
Because it was cheaper than going to the hardware store and buying actual wallpaper. It sounds like an urban legend, but it was just basic economics at that point.
When the cost of printing the note exceeds the face value of the note, you have reached, well, the terminal phase of a currency.
The absolute end.
So that is exactly what we are digging into today. Our mission is to unpack the paper mark. We want to understand the economics of the Weimar Republic, but not just the graphs and the charts. We want to get at the human story behind these astronomical numbers.
Right. How does a society function when the fundamental rules of value just dissolve?
And just to clarify our scope here, we are looking at the sources detailing the period roughly from 1914 up to about 1924.
Yes, we want to examine the mechanics of the collapse, the how, but also the controversial why, because as we're going to see, historians and economists still argue about whose fault it really was.
I have to say, looking at the Notgeld, the emergency money, and the sheer scale of the numbers on these notes is exciting in a terrifying sort of way. It really does feel like we're analyzing a dystopia, but it was real life for millions of people.
It does feel like fiction. But what's so fascinating here is that this isn't just a story about inflation. It's not just a central bank printing too much paper. It is a story about massive political gambles, crushing war debts, international poker games, and ultimately, the psychology of trust.
The psychology of trust?
Because that's all money is. It's nothing but a shared belief. And when that trust evaporates, value evaporates with it.
So let's rewind. We have to go back before the wheelbarrows of cash, before the wallpaper. We have to go back to a time when the German mark was actually as good as gold. This is section 1, the gamble.
1914. The first domino to fall.
Right. So World War I begins, August 1914. The guns start firing across Europe. And immediately, before the first major battles are even concluded, the German government makes a huge financial decision.
A fateful one.
They suspend the gold standard.
And this is the moment the anchor is cut. Up until this point, if you had a paper mark, you could technically walk into the Reichsbank, the central bank, and demand a specific weight of physical gold in exchange for it.
So there's a hard limit on how much money they can print.
Exactly. It limits how much paper the government can create. You can only print as much as you have gold in the vault to back it up. So by suspending it, they are basically saying, we are off the leash.
We can print what we need.
Exactly. But the bigger issue, and really the original sin of this entire economic tragedy, wasn't just leaving gold. Every country did that to some extent during the war. You had to.
That makes sense.
The real problem was how Germany decided they were going to pay for this massive, world-altering conflict.
I was reading this comparison to France in the source material, and it is absolutely striking. France looked at the coming war bill and said, okay, this is going to be hideously expensive.
As you would.
And they introduced their first income tax to help fund the war effort. They tried to pay as they went, at least a little bit. They asked for some sacrifice from the public up front.
France tried to balance the books, relatively speaking. They faced the reality. But Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II and the Reichstag, the parliament, voted unanimously to do something completely different.
Unanimously.
Unanimously. They decided to fund the war entirely by borrowing.
Entirely. So no new taxes, no war tax.
Almost zero. They didn't want to upset the wealthy industrialists, and they didn't want to upset the working class with high taxes during a war that was supposed to be popular. So they just put the whole war on the national credit card.
Why on earth would they do that? I mean, that seems incredibly reckless even by 1914 standards. You're fighting a world war.
Well, this is the bet. And you really have to try to get into the mindset of the German leadership in 1914. They were absolutely convinced, 100% certain, that they would win the war.
So this wasn't a gamble to them. It was a sure thing.
It was a sure thing. And not just that they would win, but that they would win quickly. We're talking weeks or months, not years, of trench warfare, the whole home by Christmas mentality.
So the plan was, we'll borrow the money now, we'll beat the Allies in a few months, and then
make the defeated Allies pay for it all, with interest. The plan was to annex resource-rich territories in both the West and the East, and then to impose massive, crippling cash reparations on the losers.
So the entire financial strategy was literally, we'll make France and Britain pay for our war debt once we beat them.
Precisely. And they were looking back at history for this. They weren't just making it up. In 1870, under Bismarck, Germany beat France in the Franco-Prussian War.
Right.
They forced France to pay a huge indemnity in gold. A massive amount. And that payment actually fueled a huge economic boom in Germany in the late 19th century.
So the leaders in 1914 thought history was just a circle. We did it once, we'll do it again, but bigger.
They were banking on a victory dividend. They saw war not as a cost, but as an investment that would pay off handsomely.
But, spoiler alert, they didn't win.
They did not. The bet failed spectacularly. And that reality check was brutal. The victory dividend never came. Instead of a quick summer war, they got 4 years of grinding industrial slaughter that bled the country dry.
And when the dust finally settled in 1918, Germany had lost. The Kaiser had abdicated and fled.
And the new government, this fragile new democracy called the Weimar Republic, is born into this absolute chaos. And its very first birthday present is a national debt of 156 billion marks.
156 billion. And just to be clear, that's domestic debt, right? That's money the German government borrowed from its own citizens.
Yes, this is crucial. People had sold their jewelry, emptied their savings accounts, bought war bonds because they were told it was patriotic and, just as importantly, that it was a safe, guaranteed investment.
And now the government owes them 156 billion marks, but the government is broke and has lost the war that was supposed to pay for it all.
Correct. And the warning signs were there even during the war, even if the government propaganda tried to hide it. Between 1914 and 1918, the mark had already started to seriously devalue against the U.S. dollar, which was a neutral currency for most of the war.
I saw that stat in the sources. It went from about 4.2 marks to the dollar in 1914.
Which was the stable pre-war gold standard rate.
To 7.9 marks by the end of the war in 1918.
Which is bad, right? Let's be clear. That's nearly half its value gone in 4 years. If that happened today to the euro or the dollar, there would be widespread panic.
Oh, absolutely. It would be a major crisis.
But compared to what is coming, 7.9 marks to the dollar sounds like a dream. It sounds like the good old days of unimaginable stability.
It really does. But at the time, that slide from 4.2 to 7.9 was a blinking red light on the dashboard of the economy.
It was a clear signal that the currency was already sick, The government had been printing money to pay for war supplies, to pay soldiers, without the economic production or the gold reserves to back it up.
It's that classic case of too many marks circulating and not enough goods to buy with them.
Precisely. And it wasn't a secret. John Maynard Keynes, the famous British economist, actually wrote about this in 1919. He basically said that governments of Europe were too timid to tax their people properly for the war, so they printed notes instead. He called it a hidden tax.
A hidden tax on savers.
The worst kind.
So the war ends, the debt is massive, the currency is already sliding, and the Kaiser has fled.
This leads us right into the post-war mess. Section 2, the burden of peace.
1919 to 1922. This is where the Treaty of Versailles kicks in and throws gasoline on the fire.
The reparations. This is usually the part of the story everyone knows, or at least thinks they know. The common narrative is usually pretty simple. Germany was crushed by impossible reparations, so they had no choice but to print money to pay them.
Right, that's the popular version.
But looking at the sources we have, it's a little more complicated than just the bill was too high, isn't it?
It is much, much more nuanced, and this is where we really have to dig into the details to understand what was happening. In May of 1921, the Allies finally set the final bill. It was called the London Schedule of Payments.
And the headline figure was enormous.
The headline figure was 132 billion gold marks.
132 billion in gold marks, not paper marks, which sounds like an impossible astronomical number for an economy that has just been shattered by 4 years of war. It was a massive number. Politically, it was designed to be. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's a bit of a shell game. The Allied politicians, especially the British, knew Germany couldn't actually pay 132 billion.
They knew it was unrealistic from the start.
They did. So they structured the debt into different types of bonds, A, B, and C bonds.
Okay, let's break that down. What's the difference between these bonds?
The A and B bonds added up to about 50 billion marks. Those are the ones Germany was actually expected to pay and start making interest payments on immediately. That was the real bill, so to speak.
Okay, 50 billion, still huge, but less than half the headline number. So what were the C bonds?
The C bonds made up the rest, about 82 billion marks. These were largely hypothetical. They were essentially parked off to the side, and payments on them would only begin once Germany's economy was deemed strong enough to handle it.
Which everyone knew would be. Never.
Or at least not for a very, very long time. The Allies included them to make the total number look huge, to satisfy their own angry public opinion back home. The French and British public had suffered immensely. They wanted to see a big number. They wanted to see Germany punished on paper.
So it was pure political theater.
To a very large extent, yes. The politicians could say, look, we're charging them 132 billion. But privately, the economists and financiers knew that Germany probably wouldn't ever have to pay those C bonds.
But still, the 50 billion in A and B bonds was real, and it was still a very heavy burden for a recovering economy.
No doubt about it. And this brings us right to the great debate on the why. Was it just these reparations that broke the German economy, or was something else going on?
Yeah, let's get into this, because the sources present two very different, conflicting sides of the story here. And per our mission, we need to report on both of them impartially.
Right. We are not taking sides. We are just looking at the evidence and the arguments from the time. On one side, you have the official German view.
The story they were telling the world.
Exactly. The German leadership claimed that the structure of the reparations payments forced them to destroy their own currency. They argued they had no choice.
Walk me through that logic. How did they argue that?
Well, the Allies didn't want worthless paper marks. That was obvious. They wanted hard assets. They wanted gold, or they wanted foreign currency, US dollars, British pounds, French francs.
Currencies that were still stable.
Right. So to get that foreign currency, the German government argued they had to take their own paper marks, which they could print endlessly, and sell them on the open currency markets.
So let me see if I have this right. I'm the German government. I need to pay France $1 billion. I don't have $1 billion. So I print, say, 10 trillion marks.
Or whatever the exchange rate is that day.
And I go to the currency exchange markets, and I sell my mountain of marks to buy US dollars, so I can then hand those dollars over to France.
Precisely. But what happens when you flood the world market with your own currency? When you are desperately selling trillions of marks at any price just to get dollars?
The value of the mark plummets. It's basic supply and demand. You're creating infinite supply.
Exactly. The German government argued this was an involuntary reaction. They said, look, we have no choice. The bill is due. We have to print and sell our currency to pay it, and that is what's destroying its value. This is often called the balance of payments theory of the hyperinflation.
So their argument is we have no choice. The Allies are forcing us to do this. It's their fault.
That's their argument in a nutshell. But then you have the Allied view, specifically from the British and French economic experts at the time. They were not buying this story at all.
They thought something else was going on.
Oh, yeah. They argued that Germany was purposefully stoking inflation. They believed the German government was intentionally letting the currency collapse, or even actively helping it collapse, as a political strategy.
A strategy? How does destroying your own money help you? That sounds completely insane.
The argument was that Germany wanted to prove to the world, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they could not pay the reparations. It was a performance of poverty.
So they were trying to look broke on purpose.
They were trying to say, look how broken we are. Look at our crazy, out-of-control inflation. You have to reduce the reparations bill because our society is falling apart. It was a way of demonstrating incapacity.
That is the high-stakes game of chicken. I'll destroy my own economy so you can't collect the debt. Is there any actual evidence for that theory?
There is some historical evidence that points in that direction. The sources mention records from the Reich Chancellery, the German government's own files, that suggest that delays in necessary tax reform were seen as advantageous.
What do you mean by that?
Basically, the German politicians thought, if we fix our budget too quickly, if we raise taxes and balance the books, the Allies will just turn around and say, aha, see, you do have money, pay us the full price.
So if they stayed in a state of crisis, they might get a discount on the bill.
Exactly. It's a perverse incentive. And let's not forget, inflation had a very convenient hidden benefit for the German government regarding that massive domestic debt we talked about. Remember the 156 billion marks they borrowed from their own people to fight the war?
The war bonds?
Yes. That debt was denominated in paper marks. It wasn't indexed to gold or inflation. So as the mark collapsed in value, the real value of that massive government debt just vanished.
Oh, I see. So if the government owes a citizen 1,000,000 marks from a war bond and suddenly 1,000,000 marks only buys a single stick of gum.
They can pay you back with pocket change, and technically, legally, they are debt-free.
Wow.
The government could pay off war bonds worth billions with money that essentially cost them only the price of printing. By letting inflation run wild, the German state effectively liquidated its entire domestic war debt.
So they were stiffing their own citizens, the very people who patriotically bought war bonds to support the country.
In effect, yes. They transferred the cost of the war from the government's books to the private savings of the middle class. Inflation is a tax that no one ever gets to vote on. It just eats your wealth silently.
And while all this political maneuvering is happening, while the Germans are playing chicken with the Allies, the numbers on the ground are starting to get really scary.
They are accelerating.
By mid-1922, the mark hits 320 per dollar. Then, just 6 months later, by December 1922, it's at 7,400 per dollar.
And the cost of living index, which measures everyday prices, went from 41 to 685 in just that 6-month period. The slide has begun, the snow is loosening on the mountain, but the avalanche, the absolute terrifying vertical drop, is just around the corner.
And that brings us to Section 3, 1923, the year of madness.
This is where the story shifts from high inflation to true hyperinflation. And it wasn't just abstract economic policy that caused it. There was a specific trigger event. It wasn't just numbers on a page. It was troops on the ground.
Coal. It all came down to coal.
It came down to coal. We have to remember, reparations weren't just demanded in cash. The Treaty of Versailles demanded payments in kind. Goods. Things like timber, livestock, chemicals, and massive, massive amounts of coal.
Germany was supposed to send trainloads of coal to France every single month.
Yes, to help rebuild French industry, which had been devastated by the war. And were they doing it?
Not consistently. The sources say Germany was way behind on its deliveries. Specifically, the Reparations Commission declared that Germany had failed to deliver its required coal and timber shipments for the 34th time in 36 months.
34 out of 36. I mean, you can see why the French might be getting a little annoyed at this point.
It looks like deliberate foot dragging.
That's certainly how France and Belgium saw it. They had lost patience. They believed Germany was withholding the coal on purpose as part of its strategy to avoid reparations. So in January 1923, they decided to take matters into their own hands.
The French and Belgian armies marched in. They occupied the Ruhr Valley.
Yes. And for anyone who doesn't know German geography, the Ruhr is not just some random piece of land. It is the industrial heart of Germany.
It's an engine room. It's where all the coal mines are, the steel mills, the heavy industry. It's everything.
Imagine if a foreign army occupied the Rust Belt of the U.S. in the 1950s, or the industrial Midlands of the U.K. It was an invasion of the nation's economic jugular. The French were there to take the goods by force. They were going to oversee the mines and factories themselves and ship the products home.
And the German response was fascinating. They didn't fight back with their army. They couldn't really because their army had been dismantled by the treaty. So they ordered a campaign of passive resistance.
Yes, the German government, led by Chancellor Wilhelm Kuno, ordered the workers of the Ruhr to go on a general strike. It was a direct command. Do not work for the occupiers. Do not mine coal for them. Do not run the trains. Do not load the ships. Grind the entire region to a halt.
It sounds incredibly patriotic. A national general strike against a foreign occupier. It must have been very popular.
It was. It united the country in defiance. But economically, it was the fatal flaw that broke the currency completely and unleashed the final hyperinflationary storm.
Why? What was the flaw?
Because here's the problem. The government has just ordered hundreds of thousands of industrial workers to stop working. But those workers still need to eat. They still need to pay rent. They have families to feed. Who pays them?
The government has to.
The government promised to pay their wages. But think about this from a budget perspective. The government has just shut down its main source of tax revenue, all the industry in the Ruhr. The factories aren't running, so they aren't paying taxes. The coal isn't being sold, so there's no revenue there.
So they have zero income coming in from their richest region.
But they are now on the hook for paying the full wages of an entire industrial workforce to stay home and do nothing.
It's a mathematical impossibility. You have no money coming in and massive new expenses going out, so they have only one option left.
The printing press. It was the only tool they had left in the box. They just printed the money to pay the wages. They printed money to support the families of the striking workers. The floodgates didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges.
And unlike before, there was now no production to soak up all this new money.
Precisely. You had these huge amounts of new cash hitting the system, but the factories were closed, so there were fewer goods to buy.
Too much money chasing too few goods. That is the classic textbook definition of inflation.
And this is where the graph goes vertical. Let's look at the deep dive numbers here because they are just staggering. In the single month of October 1923, prices rose 29,500%.
29,500%. I can't even calculate that in my head.
It's about 21% per day. Prices were doubling every 3 to 4 days. Imagine your cup of coffee costing $3 on Monday. On Tuesday, it's $3 on Monday. By Friday, it's over $6. And then it just keeps compounding day after day.
Your weekly wages received on a Friday would lose a third of their value by Monday.
Or more. And the sources compared this to other historical hyperinflations. To give us some context, we've all heard of Zimbabwe in 2008 or Yugoslavia in the 90s. Where does Weimar rank among the worst of all time?
It's high up the list.
It's actually not the absolute highest percentage in history. Hungary in 1946 holds that terrifying record. Their inflation was so fast that prices were doubling every 15 hours.
Every 15 hours, that's just chaos.
It's beyond comprehension. Weimar prices doubled every few days. But Weimar is the most famous hyperinflation because it happened to a major advanced Western economy. It shocked the entire world because it wasn't supposed to happen there. Germany was a place of order, of banking, of structure. If the mark could die, any currency could die.
By November 1923, the exchange rate hits its peak. It is 4.2 trillion marks to one single US dollar.
4.2 trillion. The number becomes meaningless. It's just abstraction. And this complete breakdown of meaning leads to a breakdown of trust in the money itself. The sources talk about the flight from cash.
People didn't want money anymore. They wanted things.
Anything.
Yeah.
Anything physical. If you got paid, you ran to the store. You didn't walk, you ran. Because if you held onto your cash for even an hour, you lost purchasing power.
So you bought a piano, a new pair of shoes, a sack of potatoes. It didn't matter what it was.
Even if you didn't play the piano, a piano was a better store of value than a stack of banknotes that would be worthless tomorrow.
And this behavior actually makes the inflation worse, doesn't it? It's called increasing monetary velocity.
Exactly. Velocity is the speed at which money changes hands. When everyone tries to spend their money the exact moment they receive it, it pours fuel on the fire. It drives prices up even faster. It creates a death spiral, a vicious feedback loop.
And I love this detail from the sources about the cigarette economy. It sounds like something out of a prison movie, but it was happening on the streets of Berlin.
It is a fascinating example of economics in the wild. When the official money fails, people don't just stop trading. They are resourceful. They find or create their own money. And in Germany, American cigarettes became a de facto currency.
Why cigarettes specifically?
Well, think about the properties of good money. It needs to be durable, divisible, portable, and have a commonly accepted value.
And cigarettes are all three?
All four, really. You
Yeah.
can carry a pack easily. You can pay with a single cigarette for a small item or a whole carton for a bigger item. And crucially, they held their real value because people wanted to smoke them. They had intrinsic utility.
And the sources mention this created a reversal of Gresham's law. Can you unpack that for us?
Right. So Gresham's law is a classic economic principle that says bad money drives out good.
Meaning?
Meaning, if you have two types of coins in circulation, say a pure silver coin, good money, and a debased coin with cheap metal in it, bad money, you will spend the bad coin and hoard the good one. You keep the valuable stuff for yourself and pass on the junk.
So normally the bad money is the one that's floating around in the economy.
Normally, yes. But in Weimar Germany, the paper mark was so bad, so utterly worthless, that nobody wanted it at all. It was completely rejected. People would say, I don't want your paper marks, they're useless.
So the good money?
The cigarettes, or foreign currency like dollars if you could find it, that started circulating because it was the only thing people would actually accept in a trade. The mark had ceased to function as a medium of exchange.
It's incredible. The official currency of the German nation is literally trash, so people are trading smokes to buy food.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about these abstract numbers like trillions, but I want to talk about what that actually looked like in your hand. Section 4, the physical reality of the paper mark.
Because eventually, the printing presses couldn't even keep up with adding more zeros to the notes.
First off, that name paper mark. That wasn't the official name for the currency, was it?
No, formerly it was just the German mark. Paper mark was a derisive, scornful nickname that stuck. It was a way of mocking the currency after it had gone off the gold standard. It emphasized that this stuff was just paper. It had no soul, no backing.
And the coins. The source material mentions the coinage crisis. Precious metals like silver and gold just vanished from circulation.
Immediately. They were hoarded from day one. They disappeared into mattresses and floorboards and were melted down. So the mints had to start making coins out of aluminum, zinc, and iron. Cheap base metals.
They felt light and worthless.
They felt fake, because they essentially were. Their metal value was a tiny fraction of their face value, and their face value is becoming worthless anyway.
There's a description of a coin from the province of Westphalia in the notes. It had a face value of 1 billion marks.
A 1 billion mark coin. Just think about that. A small metal disc stamped with the number 1 billion. And yet, by the time it was minted, it wouldn't even buy you a newspaper. There were aluminum coins worth 500 marks that were practically washer rings you could buy at a hardware store.
And the banknotes themselves became these bizarre works of art. The sources mention these beautiful classic portraits by German masters like Dürer and Holbein appearing on billion mark and trillion mark notes.
The Reichsbank was desperately trying to project an image of stability and high culture through the design of the notes. Look, here is a beautiful portrait by an old master, and it's on a note worth 50 billion marks. It was this surreal contrast. High culture printed on the face of total economic collapse.
But the central bank couldn't physically print the money fast enough, right? The demand for cash was infinite.
No, this is the insane logistics of hyperinflation. They literally couldn't source enough paper, ink, and printing plates. The government printing presses were running 24/7, but prices were rising faster than the ink could dry on the new notes.
And this led to not geld, emergency money.
This is my favorite part of the visual history of this period. Not geld was issued because the central government just couldn't supply enough cash to the country.
So local towns, railways, private companies, they all just started printing their own cash.
Yes. The central bank basically lost its monopoly on creating money. The Reichsbahn, the national railway, issued millions of its own notes.
Yeah.
Cities like Hamburg and Munich printed their own. A shoe factory might pay its workers in shoe factory marks that could be redeemed at the local stores.
And some of them were funny or satirical, right?
Oh, absolutely. Since they were printing their own money, they got creative. Some were beautiful artistic designs. Others were political cartoons. The sources mention notes depicting donkeys pooping gold coins, or notes with grim reapers on them. It was money as social commentary.
But it must have added to the chaos.
It was total confusion. You might have a billion-mark note from Berlin, a billion-mark note from the local town hall, and a coupon from the sausage factory, and you had to figure out if any of them were worth anything at all.
And there's a little sidebar here about the free city of Danzig.
Danzig is an interesting case study. At the time, it was a semi-autonomous city-state on the Baltic coast. They used the German mark, so they were forced to import Germany's inflation.
They were dragged down with the ship.
They were. But they broke away sooner. They issued their own emergency notes up to 10 billion marks, but then they managed to switch to a new, more stable currency, the Danzig Gulden, a bit earlier than Germany stabilized its own mess. It just shows how fragmented the entire economic landscape had become.
So you have a billion-mark coin, cigarette money, factory money, and wallpaper made of cash. The system is completely broken. People are starving. Society is tearing itself apart at the seams. It feels like the end of the world. But then it stops.
It does, almost overnight. And it's often called the miracle of the Rentenmark.
Section 5, the miracle of stabilization. Because looking at the timeline, it seems to happen with incredible speed in November of 1923.
It was incredibly fast and decisive. But we should mention they had a false start first. The sources talk about the rye mark.
The rye mark. This is proposed by a politician named Karl Helfferich. He wanted to create a new currency that was backed by rye grain.
Yes. The logic was, we have no gold. What do we have in Germany? We have productive agricultural land. We grow rye. We make bread. So he proposed a currency where every note represented a claim on a certain amount of rye.
Why was that idea rejected? It sounds earthy and solid.
Because the price of rye fluctuates. You can't have your national currency tied to the price of toast. If there's a bad harvest, the value of your money changes. If there's a bumper crop, it changes again. It's just too unstable. You need a standard that doesn't rot or depend on the weather.
Okay, so no rye mark. Instead, we get the Rentenmark. This was the solution proposed by the finance minister, Hans Luther, and executed by a man named Hjalmar Schacht, the new currency commissioner.
Hjalmar Schacht is a key and very controversial figure here. He was brilliant, he was arrogant, and he understood that the problem wasn't just math, it was pure psychology.
He knew he had to restore trust.
Exactly. Germany had no gold. The economy was in ruins. So how do you create a new currency that people will actually believe in?
So Schacht created the Rentenmark. What was it backed by?
This is the genius part. Yeah. It was backed by smoke and mirrors, essentially. But officially, it was backed by mortgage bonds levied on all the land and industrial property in Germany.
So essentially the government was saying this new money is worth something because Germany's factories and farms are worth something?
Precisely. The government basically took out a giant mortgage on the entire country. The Rentenmark was indexed to the gold price, but it was not convertible to gold. You couldn't walk into a bank and demand a piece of gold for it.
But the government said, we pledge the physical assets of the nation as collateral. If this currency fails, we technically owe you the land.
And people bought it. They were so desperate for any kind of stability that they were willing to believe. And Schacht was absolutely ruthless in his execution. He set the exchange rate. One new Rentenmark replaced 1 trillion paper mark.
1 trillion to 1. They just cut 12 zeros off everything.
12 zeros. Gone. Imagine taking a magic marker and crossing out 12 zeros on every price tag in every shop in the country. Suddenly, that loaf of bread isn't 200 billion marks. It's 0.2 Rentenmarks. It looks normal again.
It sounds like a psychological trick more than anything.
It was a massive confidence trick. But Schacht backed it up with brutally hard policy. And this is the most important part of the whole stabilization. He physically stopped the printing presses from financing government debt.
This was Schacht's hard line.
He went to the government and said, the party is over. If you want to spend money, you have to collect it in taxes or borrow it legitimately from real people at real interest rates. I'm not printing one more mark for you.
That must have taken incredible political courage. The government must have been screaming for cash to pay its bills.
They were. But Schacht refused to discount government treasury bills at the Reichsbank, which was the mechanism they'd been using to print money. He just turned off the tap. And because the supply of new money finally stopped, the value stabilized. The Rentenmark held its value at 4.2 to the dollar, the old pre-war golden age rate.
So the fever broke, the patient survived, but you don't just walk away from a fever like that without some serious long-term damage. Section 6. The hangover.
The revaluation and the aftermath. This is the part of the story that often gets left out of the popular history books. We think, oh, they fixed the money, the nightmare was over, and everyone lived happily ever after.
But it was far from it. Because let's look at the winners and losers here. Inflation on this scale is a massive, violent transfer of wealth. If you had savings.
You were wiped out. Completely and totally. Imagine you had worked your entire life.
Yeah.
You were a prudent middle-class German. You saved 50,000 marks by 1914. That was a fortune. It was enough to buy a house, to retire on comfortably.
A lifetime of work.
And by the end of 1923, that 50,000 marks wouldn't buy a single newspaper. Your life's work had been turned into worthless paper. The entire saver class, the middle class, the pensioners, they were destitute.
They were reduced to poverty overnight. But what if you were a debtor? What if you were a slick industrialist who had borrowed massive amounts of money to buy factories and build an empire?
You were the winner of the century. You were king. You could pay off your entire 20-year mortgage with the loose change in your pocket. The price of a postage stamp could clear a 1,000,000-mark debt.
The inflation cleared all debts.
It did. The sources talk about Hugo Stinnes, the famous industrialist who became known as the king of inflation. His strategy was simple. Borrow marks, buy real assets, factories, mines, newspapers, anything physical, and then pay back the loans with worthless paper. He owned half of Germany by the end of it.
So the responsible people who saved lost everything, and the reckless people who borrowed got fabulously rich. That sounds deeply unfair.
It felt incredibly unfair. It tore the social fabric of the country apart. It inverted the entire moral logic of capitalism. The virtue of work hard and save became a sucker's game.
And the creditors, the people who had lent money, were furious. They had been robbed. They demanded the government do something to fix it.
And this led to the revaluation laws of 1925. The government was under huge political pressure from the people who had lost their savings and their loans. So they passed laws to revalue some of these now worthless debts. They tried to retroactively undo some of the damage.
Could they actually give everyone their money back?
No, absolutely not. The money, the real wealth, was gone. But for mortgages and certain types of government bonds, they reinstated them at roughly 15% to 25% of their original gold mark value.
So if I had lent you enough money to buy a house, I might get a quarter of it back. Eventually.
Roughly, yes. Which, of course, meant the creditors were still furious because they lost 75% of their money, and the debtors were furious because they suddenly had to start paying a debt they thought had completely disappeared. Nobody was happy.
It was a compromise that satisfied no one.
Exactly. And this stabilization caused a crisis of its own, didn't it? The sources call it the stabilization crisis.
Right, because inflation is like a drug for the economy.
It is. It keeps things moving artificially. When shock turned off the money tap, the withdrawal symptoms hit the economy hard. Companies that had survived by taking out cheap, printed loans suddenly went bankrupt. They couldn't get credit anymore.
So unemployment shot up.
Unemployment shot up, businesses failed, and strikes returned. It was a very painful economic detox.
There was even a major legal battle over all this.
A huge one. The German Supreme Court actually had to rule on the constitutionality of these revaluation laws. They eventually ruled that the laws were constitutional, which set a major precedent for judicial review in Germany, the idea that the court could check the government's economic laws. But legally speaking, the damage was already done.
It really shows that just fixing the money was only the first step. The trust in the state, in the system, in fairness, that was shattered. People felt profoundly betrayed.
And that leads us directly to the legacy of this whole period.
The outro. Because we can't talk about 1923 without talking about what came next.
No, you can't. This event scarred the German national psyche in a way that is difficult to overstate. To this day, German monetary policy is incredibly focused on stability and has an almost pathological fear of inflation. You cannot understand modern Germany's economic thinking without understanding 1923.
You see that in the Euro crisis debates over the last decade, right? Germany is always the voice in the room saying, do not print money, be careful with debt, austerity first.
That is the ghost of 1923 talking. It's baked into their economic DNA.
Yeah.
But here is a fascinating trick of memory, the sources point out. A study showed that many Germans today actually conflate the trauma of 1923 with the trauma of 1929.
1929 being the start of the Great Depression.
Yes, the Great Depression was about deflation prices falling and mass unemployment. 1923 was hyperinflation prices rising to infinity. They are economic opposites.
But in the collective memory, they've merged.
They've merged into one big, dark memory. It's just one long national trauma of economic ruin. They remember the chaos, the poverty, and the fear, and the specific economic causes get blurred together.
It's a trauma that reshaped the world. Because who rises out of the ashes of this chaos?
Well, it paves the road for political radicalism. When the stable middle class loses everything, when playing by the rules leaves you destitute and cheated, you start listening to people who say the entire system is rigged and needs to be burned down. You start looking for scapegoats.
And it is not a coincidence that Adolf Hitler's beer hall pushed his first violent attempt to seize power Happened in November 1923.
Right at the absolute peak of the hyperinflation, when the country was at its most broken and desperate.
It's a chilling thought. The economic chaos creates the vacuum for political monsters to fill.
It creates the despair that radicals feed on.
I want to leave everyone with this one last image from a Los Angeles Times report in 1924. They reported that there were more decommissioned German banknotes in the United States being used as souvenirs or collector's items than there were left circulating in Germany.
Americans were buying them as funny novelties. Look at this billion-mark note. Isn't that a riot?
While Germans were still peeling them off their wall.
Exactly. One person's profound tragedy is another person's cheap souvenir.
It really makes you ask the question, when money loses its meaning, what actually holds a society together? We think of money as this solid, real thing like gravity, but is it? Or is value just purely a shared hallucination?
That is the fundamental question. As long as we all agree to believe in it, it works like magic. The moment the belief stops, well, you get 1923. You get the wheelbarrow full of useless paper.
Something to mull over next time you swipe your credit card for a loaf of bread. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the Weimar hyperinflation. We'll catch you on the next one.